I'm Amy Goodman as we talk about the history of May Day, 120 years ago today, May 1st, 1886. Our guest is James Green. Death in the Haymarket is his book, a story of Chicago, the first labor movement, and the bombing that divided Gilded Age America. Again, welcome. And as we continue with the story, May Day, 1886, there is a mass uprising in Chicago.
Right, and a tremendous euphoria, and people in the streets and celebrating because they call it their Emancipation Day, actually, because it appeared that all this would take place peacefully, and it was a great empowerment moment for the immigrants who'd come here and hadn't yet started to vote. This was their vehicle almost for asserting their definition of Americanism. And unfortunately, something happened on May 3rd that led to tragic consequences. There were pickets at the McCormick harvester plant. They called it the Reaper Works. They produced farm implements. There were strike breakers. There was a lockout going on there. Workers protested the lockout. There was a fight. Chicago police intervened massively, and several workers were killed, several unarmed workers. So the anarchists in Chicago, and I have to tell you a little bit about them, they were very active, very well organized in Chicago, led by Albert and Lucy Parsons. And they were people from Texas, not from Germany. Albert Parsons was from East Texas. He met Lucy there, who was a woman who had grown up in slavery and had become a free person, and they were married in Texas and had to flee there because they were fighting for black rights after Reconstruction, and they were dodging the Ku Klux Klan.
And they were an interracial couple.
And they were an interracial couple, and radicals who believed, in those days, being radical meant you supported the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. In Texas, that was radical, and it could cost you your life.
And so, Albert Parsons ran a press.
He ran a press that supported the black freedom movement of the time, and he lost all of his former friends and was, couldn't sleep in the homes of white people, so he had already stepped outside of the mainstream before he left Texas. They came to Chicago in 1873 in the midst of a Great Depression, and as a result of their experiences there, particularly in the Great Uprising of 1877 when the Chicago police shot people in the streets, they became revolutionaries and called themselves anarchists by 1886. Parsons was a very, very good organizer. He was probably one of the key people in the whole 8-hour movement in Chicago, and so was his comrade, August Spies, who was the man who edited this daily German newspaper, this anarchist newspaper.
And where had August Spies come from?
He was from the forests of Germany. He grew up in a relatively privileged family background, and he too came to America, and what he saw here radicalized him, actually, and also hearing speeches of people talking about the evils of capitalism as they experienced. They were both rather independent men, tradesmen. Parsons was a printer, Spies was an upholsterer, and yet they identified themselves with the cause of the masses of immigrants in the city of Chicago. So when they heard about this killing by the police, they called a rally the next night on May 4th in the Haymarket Square, which is where workers had always gathered for political events. And they wanted it to be a peaceful rally. Everything so far had been peaceful in the 8-hour strikes. And indeed, the rally was peaceful. The mayor of Chicago came and said, I don't hear any talk of throwing bombs. I don't hear any threats.
In fact, Albert Parsons wasn't even going to be there, right? He'd been somewhere else.
Right. He was planning to go somewhere else. And in fact, he wasn't even expecting trouble. So he brought Lucy and his 2 children, Albert Jr. and Lulu. And later on in the defense, they said, well, how could a man be advocating violence with innocent people around? And so the rally was winding down. It was about 10:30 in the evening. It started to rain. In fact, Albert and Lucy left the rally for the warmth of a nearby saloon. And just as the rally was winding down, a large force of police marched on the square where the rally was taking place. Haymarket Square, about 176 police. The police captain had actually disobeyed the orders of the mayor, who said the rally's peaceful, there's no need to disperse it. The police captain acted on his own, marched right up to them and said, you must disperse. And the speaker said, but we are peaceful. And he said, you must disperse anyway. And as the speaker was coming down from the wagon, someone, and to this day we don't know who it was, threw a bomb that landed into the ranks of the police. 1 officer was killed immediately. 6 others later died. The police were panicked, of course, almost hysterical. They'd never expected anything like this. Began firing, probably shot, each other, shot people in the crowd. And in the end, 7 police died, and at least 3 of the demonstrators, many, many people were wounded. And this was the tragic, violent Haymarket riot. It had an enormous consequences for what happened in labor history afterwards.
Explain.
Well, it set off hysteria. Nothing like this had ever happened before in peacetime America. There have been horrible losses of life in battlefields, but in the middle of a city, there have been many riots, many demonstrations. Many citizens had died, but never any police. So this was a shocking event. And it also sort of triggered off all the fears that many Americans had, people born here, of this massive number of immigrants who lived around them. Majority of the people in Chicago were foreign-born. So there was a great deal of anxiety about that. And this attack on the police by what was assumed to be an anarchist, or today would be called a terrorist, really set off a kind of anxiety that the United States had not experienced before, and the nation's first Red Scare. So people were rounded up, newspapers were suppressed, people's homes were searched without warrant, and the anarchists, 10 anarchists, were arrested and tried for the bombing.
The role of the paper in the anti-immigrant hysteria, and again, to this day, you don't know who did this.
Right, right. Well, the newspapers, I quote them at length, and it'll make your hair stand on end to see what they said about immigrants then, because there were no holds barred. And so these were...
Do you see similarities with today?
I do, although I think people today are being a little more careful about the overtly racist. I mean, there were all kinds of racist things in the papers about Germans and Czechs, you know. I mean, it wasn't just the color of people's skin, it was that they were foreign and they were threatening and they were un-American. And so as soon as the bombing occurred, it didn't matter whether they found the actual perpetrator. Someone was going to pay for this. And the Chicago papers and the New York Times was even more extreme, actually. Somebody has to hang for this. And ultimately, 4 anarchists did, even though the evidence doesn't place them at the crime scene, doesn't really put the bomb in any of their hands. They were the victims of the...
Talk about the people who went on trial and the 4 men who hanged.
Right. Eight people were indicted, anarchists, all workers, all organizers. 7 of them immigrants were indicted, not for, no one was accused of throwing the bomb, but having knowledge of a conspiracy that led to the bombing. Later, this was regarded as an unprecedented kind of trial where people could be not only accused of being accessories, but sentenced to death, as 7 of them were, for having knowledge. And later on, it was said that they were sentenced as much for what they had said as what they did.